Ed Vaizey, are we ending up with people being where they were at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, do you reckon they're in more or less the same position? Or do you think anything has changed in your view, at least?
Well, I think broadly speaking, yes. If you were pro-Boris at the beginning, you were pro-Boris at the end, and if you're anti-Boris, blah, blah, blah. I always defended Boris on Partygate, partly because I took a kind of psychological view. Lots of people working in a building together. Was there a huge difference if at the end of the day they had a glass of wine together, it wasn't going to spread the disease? Funny enough, I've become more anti-Boris at the end of this hearing. It was the first time I really understood, and forgive me for being obtuse for so many months, what really angered quite a lot of people who were relatively neutral. And it was, speaking as a kind of lockdown skeptic, I was a lockdown skeptic because I thought some of the rules were completely absurd, the kind of taping up of park benches and so on. And I think if you're going to have those absurd rules, and then when you're working together, you realise how absurd they are because you can have a glass of wine because there are 300 people in a small building working together, why are you imposing it on the rest of us? And the question about would Boris have been able to say, by all means, have a party if you're working together? Of course, he would have said no. And the advice would have been, if you do that, there'll be a loophole. People will have a party and then they'll say, oh, we were working together and Boris said it was okay. So if that was the case, then it was, I think, Boris's duty to say, we can't mess about like this.
Interesting. Ayesha, what do you mean? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I very much so. I mean, it was sort of unbelievable, really. I mean, I just can't understand. I was listening to an interview with Quentin Letts. I don't really see how anybody watched that and thought Boris Johnson came out of it quite well. I actually thought the committee did quite a good job of asking quite forensic questions, particularly Sir Bernard Jenkin. And it was interesting sort of watching Boris Johnson get tested on his own knowledge of the rules and the guidance that he was lecturing us on. And as Ed said, it was a very draconian, people were getting like busted by the police for going for like a walk with their pal and a takeaway coffee. It was absolutely ludicrous. Boris Johnson wrote a letter to a 7-year-old girl saying, look, you're going to have to cancel your party, but, good for you, you can have another one. I think that's the kind of, it's either the hypocrisy of him saying, I was basically preaching one thing to you and doing another, or it was the idiot's defense, which was, I didn't really kind of understand the rules. But there were so many great moments during it where, he was sort of getting himself tangling up in knots. My favorite moment was, everybody was laughing at this, where he kind of said as his defense, we didn't even touch each other's pens. Everybody was very glad he said pens. And then Harriet Harman sort of, she's like, what about people passing drinks to each other? He was like, yes, that did happen. But there was no parties, there were no gatherings. And it was just like, if he had stood at the podium and said, look, guys, you've got to have no parties, but you can have a bit of a gathering if you want to boost morale. And social distancing doesn't have to be perfect. Imperfect. He kept using this word imperfect. And you can have mitigations. We would have all had a very different lockdown.
And if you like that,
you can listen to us.
We're Stig and Asthma. Have you forgotten?
Well done. Every Monday to Thursday on Times Radio Breakfast.